The outcome of the lactic acid is also known as the Cori cycle. It's the hydrogen ions in the lactic acid that is the cause of people experiencing pain during exercise. The lactic acid that is produced during exercise can be reused and converted back into glucose. This is done by the cycle called the Cori cycle. Glucose is initially broken down into pyruvate, which is then converted into lactate, also known as lactic acid. This process is known as glycolysis. However, the lactate that is produced can be converted back into pyruvate by being transported into the blood to the liver. This pyruvate is then converted back to glucose, which is then moved to the muscles, where it can be used for energy. This reversal process is known as gluconeogenesis. Moving on to the DOMS. After heavy training, an athlete can feel the effect of it a day or maybe 2 days later. This is called DOMS. This stands for Delay Onset of Muscle Soreness. DOMS can be very uncomfortable for many athletes if they have worked too hard previously. The effect of DOMS can prevent them or damage their performance when training or competing. DOMS is caused by the myofibril tears or muscle strains from eccentric or unfamiliar exercise. For example, working much harder than you usually do. A person's muscle strength and motion is impaired temporarily when experiencing DOMS. A way to try and reduce the effect of DOMS or reduce the amount of time it affects you is by using light movements and passive stretches. Moving on to the second final stage is the submaximal and high duration, which is the marathon. Firstly, an analysis of the test. The energy systems used are all the energy systems, so the ATP, PC, lactic acid, and aerobic system. The sources used would be both carbohydrate and fat. The waste products produced will be a lot of lactic acid as well. Moving on to the glycogen. The glycogen will deplete as we exercise, as it's used for energy with carbs, as that is where we get it from, and it will deplete the longer it will go on. Stores need to be as big as possible when running a marathon, the glycogen stores. This can be done by carb loading. Looking at the RER, the graph, again, like we did previously, looking at moderate intensity and moderate duration activities, we can look at the fuel usage when undergoing submaximal intensities and high duration exercise. This type of exercise will, like before, use carbohydrates. However, in submaximal events, an event will also need to use another fuel source in the form of fats because of its high intensity. On the RER, using 2 fuel sources will give the submaximal exercise a reading of 0.7 on the graph. This will be around 70%, and the other half, which would be the fats, will be at 0.3 and 30%. Athletes can train their bodies so that they're mainly using fats during submaximal exercise, this is because the fat stores are bigger. Complete depletion of glycogen means the athlete is completely knackered and needs to stop. So if an athlete can train to use their fat stores as a fuel source instead of glycogen, then this will be much more beneficial for them, especially in long duration events like a marathon. Just as in exercise of moderate intensity and duration, in submaximal exercise an athlete's myoglobin stores will deplete. However, because of the increased duration of the event, the athlete's glycogen stores would deplete even more during submaximal exercise. Fat stores will deplete next nearer the end of the run. There will also be an increase in the H2O production as we sweat a lot due to the high duration of the event. More CO2 will also be produced, as the more we consume oxygen, the more to the working tired muscles and the use of our aerobic system, the more the CO2 will expire when breathing out. The outcomes, the same effect on performance. You feel aching in the muscles, tiredness physically and mentally, and poor technique when running near the end. The reduction is the recovery is all three types, so the alactic, lactic acid, and metabolic rates. And the timescale will be much longer at 2 to 5 days, as you need time to recover and replenish all the systems. The way to avoid it is by glycogen loading, also known as carbo loading. The method of carbo loading is the way you do it is for 3 days, possible 6 to 7 days before you do the run. You starve your body of carbohydrates. You need to do this for 3 days to almost set your body into a state where it is very low on carbohydrates within it, so there's barely any carbohydrates in it. After this 3-day period, you then need to consume as much carbohydrates as you can. This will then, your body will take as much energy as it possibly can from it and store it as it's been starved from it. So now the body has a very large store of carbohydrates within it and lots of energy. Meaning when it comes to the long duration event, this athlete will have greater stores of carbohydrates, which means more energy, which means they can go for longer. When analysing, by using the graph again, when analysing the graph, you can see a change from last analysis. As you can see, the VO2 has increased again, and the recovery time has prolonged much longer, so the epoch is longer. You can see that the epoch is using both the lactacid and the alactic recovery, as it needs to recover a lot. The oxygen deficit has decreased as you are consuming more VO2 with the aerobic system. Yeah, so basically there's just an increase in the amount of oxygen consumed and the length of time the recovery is. Everything else is explained previously before about the graph. Moving on to the final phase, it's the intermittent activities. This will be looking at the football analysis. So the energy systems used is all of them. So the ATP, PC, lactic acid, and aerobic systems. This is because you're doing it lasts a long time, long duration, and high intensities. But this is different from the other events, as it's because it's very stop-start and it has varied intensities, as you're not always running around and you're sometimes sprinting and sometimes jogging. The energy sources would be carbohydrates, as you are running around a lot and needing to use your glycogen stores. The waste products will be lactic acid, as your muscles having to work hard when kicking the ball and just generally running around the pitch. Moving on to the exercise components. Looking at it, it's polarization will occur in the membranes of the axon, so it's looking at the Ca ions and nerve impulses. Within the membrane is called what's sodium and potassium, and which is what's called the sodium and potassium gather. Potassium and sodium travel through each of the gates. However, through the long prolonged exercise, some of the potassium is lost, and therefore not as much potassium travels through the potassium gate. Once the impulse travels down the axon via the node of Ranvier, it reaches the neuromuscular junction. ACH is required to transfer the nerve impulse across the synaptic gap, which is at the neuromuscular junction, and initiate the muscle contraction. Chlorinitinase is an enzyme that breaks down the ACH after this role and is used again. For another muscle contraction to begin, the synaptic cleft of the synapse must be cleared first of ACH by the enzyme clyonestrinase. When there is excess ACH or lack of chlorionestrinase, fatigue results in the ability to generate a new action potential. Lastly, when the impulse reaches the muscle of the sliding filament theory, it begins where the calcium ions remove the troponin and the tropomyosin away from the actin bind sites and make them available for myosin arms to attach to them and make muscle contractions. However, over prolonged periods of time, the calcium ions can become less efficient and the sliding filament theory is less effective. Yeah, so depletion with this exercise, there'll be, just previously explained, there'll be, I was just previously explaining the ACH depletion and the chlorestinerase depletion due to the sliding filament theory. Moving on to the recovery of the activity, it's not ways to avoid it, but one way is mainly carb loading. This is like previously mentioned, starving your body of carbohydrates and then storing up to give the max amount of energy to last as long as you can running around. That would be good for football. The recovery type is all three types, so alactic, lactacid, and so the alactic and lactacid. The timescale of this will be 1 to 2 days. So, as you know, after a game of football, professional teams get the day off time to recover and let their bodies settle down. This is just to replenish all their systems and to recover from any lactic acid damage. And that's the end of my presentation.